Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Shin Kim. I'm teaching History of Israel. This is fourth actually class. As previously through the previous actually lecture, I explained if you understand this page, you may got the idea about the history of Israel, especially written in the Old Testament. Hebrews, Israel, actually BC 1800 years, 1800 actually, God called Abraham, and Abraham left Uru in Mesopotamia, and he coming to the Canaan in modern area Israel, and from actually Abraham to maybe around 600 years, it was called age of patriarchy. That means father actually ruling over the family. At the time, Israel was not a nation. Israel was only small family, maybe big family, but cannot be the occupy one city, even one city. They have a small population. So Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. So I already explained about the Abraham and Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, because of Joseph was actually sold to Egypt, and the final as a result, the family of Jacob, they entered Egypt. That's actually the end of the story of the third class. And BC 1200 or that age is called age of Judges. Later, maybe I'm gonna talking about that. Also, BC 1000, United Kingdom finally. A nation called Israel was born, and the first king was Saul, second king was King David, third king is Saul, the wise actually king called Solomon, okay? And after that, as soon as Solomon was died, unfortunately the nation was divided two parts. North part is Israel, southern part is Judea, and Assyria actually invade the north part of Israel, and Israel was disappear. And also Babylonian Empire actually also invade the southern area of Israel, Judea, and Judea was occupied by Babylonian Empire. Through the results, BC 586, unfortunately, the nation of Israel was gone, disappear, no longer exist. So that's actually the whole paradigm, the whole history of Israel written in Old Testament. So today I'm gonna talking about Exodus. Even though maybe you are not a Christian, maybe you heard of the vocabulary Exodus. It happened around the BC 13th centuries. Joseph, actually Jacob has 12 actually brothers, and Jacob's favorite son was Joseph, and the other 11 brothers jealous of Joseph, and they tried to kill him, but instead of killing him, actually they sold Joseph as a slave in Egypt. That's why Joseph was sent to Egypt, and maybe through the third class I already explained about this story. He actually interpreted the dream of King Pharaoh, the Egyptian King Pharaoh, and he became a prime minister, and he prepared 4 years good harvest, and after that 7 years of famine. And through that actually result to Jacob. At the time they live in Canaan area, and they no longer have food, and they looking for food, and they heard that there is a lot of food in Egypt. That's why they send their brothers to Egypt, and finally recognize Joseph. Joseph is alive, and he become the second leadership in Egypt, prime minister in Egypt. And Joseph knows that his father Jacob still alive, and he invite him. That's why all of the family of Jacob actually moved to Egypt. So Joseph brought Hebrews, Jacob Jacob's family to Egypt to live in safety from the famine. This is maybe the picture exactly actually describe the family of Jacob. Jacob actually extremely old. He is in the chariot and he moving. His whole family moved to Egypt. And Joseph actually take care of the family, Jacob family. But as you know, even Joseph actually become old and finally he died in Egypt. And there was a new transition. Number one is actually a new pharaoh, another king, next king. Actually, he become the king. He ascended the throne, but he next actually king of Egypt. He didn't know about Joseph. He heard of Joseph. He was a good guy. He was wise, and he stole a lot of food. Because of him, Egyptians could survive. He heard of it, but already Joseph died. And actually, he had no idea about Joseph. And even he, next king, actually Pharaoh, actually he didn't recognize the family of Jacob. And at the time, Hebrews increased in number. They actually give birth a lot of sons and daughters, and they become big tribe in Egypt. And also their big numbers were perceived as a threat. And the next king, Pharaoh, the Egyptian king, recognized they are threat to Egypt. So they actually king of Egypt actually made them slave. The whole Israel people living in Egypt, they become slave, unfortunately. And if we look at the two pictures above, actually Egyptians and the persons who sit down, they are Israel people. They become slave. Even Egyptians actually, they record those kinds of a story. So Egyptians rule over, and Israelites, Israel people become a slave in Egypt. And slave means they have no freedom. They cannot have their own property. Even as soon as a new baby was born, that was belong to new master. So slave life is miserable. So the below actual picture show that they working for the Egyptian, and the Egyptian actually watch over them and persecute them, and the Israel people, unfortunately, they become a laborer without any income. So totally actually they become a slave. So slavery in Egypt, the book of Exodus, if you get any chance to read the book of Acts, the second book of the Bible, the book of Exodus open with the Hebrews as an unorganized slave in Egypt. So there almost 400 years they had been enslaved in Egypt, unfortunately. So the length of a sojourn of Israelite in Egypt was around 400 years. Genesis chapter 15 and also Exodus chapter 12, it describes almost 430 years slavery in Egypt. So the Hebrews as a slave worked as a builder. So they actually building a lot of a city, and maybe they build another pyramid, and also even they building the new road, and they are hard worker, and their life was miserable, and they suffered. They don't have any freedom in Egypt. So unfortunately, almost over 400 years, they didn't have their personal life as a slave. And Exodus chapter 1 verse 11, Israel built Pithom and Ramses for Pharaoh. Actually, Pharaoh was the king of Egypt, and Pithom is one kind of a big city, huge city. So look at the picture. The first picture actually describe Pithom, the city, the one of the city name. Huge architecture, buildings. So unfortunately, Israelite, the people actually working, they actually building a lot of big city. Even another second city called Ramses, following the name of Ramses. So especially when we study about Egyptian history, Ramses actually was considered one of excellent pharaoh, king of Egypt. So around BC 1290, built actually both these. Ramses II actually built both those cities, and one name is Pithom and another city name is Ramses. And unfortunately, Israel people actually they are builder. Many of them died. Many of them injured. Even when we study about the history of United States, actually I living in New Jersey near to the New York City, and there was a big actually bridge between the New Jersey and New York. It called George Washington Bridge. George Washington Bridge. It is extremely huge actually bridge connecting two actually major states. And at the time, who gonna build that? Maybe some actually politician maybe build that, but the main workers actually they are Chinese. Chinese actually they built the George Washington Bridge. Many of them died, injured. That's why New Jersey governor and the New York governor agree to provide some area for Chinese to live after finishing big construction. Exactly, it is exactly like that. Israel people actually working for the Egyptian as a slave, building a huge too big city, even a good architecture, and they actually, but unfortunately they don't have any freedom. They don't have even without receiving any single dollar, they work for Egyptian. So finally, Hebrews cry out to God, especially the next actually Pharaoh ordered that kill every boy as soon as a boy in actually Israel boy was born. Actually the King Pharaoh actually ordered to kill all of the boy babies, and it was harsh. Okay, as soon as the mother actually delivered a baby and they found it was boy, actually the boy to be killed, to be murdered, because Pharaoh actually, the king of Egypt, actually afraid the increasing number of Israel people. So just imagine that you delivered a boy baby, and as soon as he was born, he was murdered by Egyptian. So they cried out. If they lost their children, they can do anything. So finally, Hebrews, Israel peoples, after 400 years later, finally they pray to God. God, please give us freedom. Our children going to die. So God heard of their prayer, and God has a plan to save them from genocide. That means the whole Israel boys must be murdered. So God heard of their cry. So according to the Bible, whenever a person who in trouble cry to God, God never ignore that cries. God is ready to hear that cries. So Hebrews knew that, and finally God heard of their suffering, their crying, and finally, actually, God God actually chose one person called Moses. So Moses is extremely important figure. When you study the Old Testament, you should remember three important names. That name is Abraham, okay? I already explained about Abraham. And today, Moses, second important figure. And the third important figure is King David. These three persons are most greatest actually Israel people. God chose Moses, and he became the main character of Exodus. Actually, Moses was born in he was boy, and he was born in Israel family, and the mother knew that the Egyptian going to find as soon as the Egyptian find Moses, they're gonna kill him. So instead of that, before that thing happened, actually he put baby Moses into the basket and floating into the Nile River. And she knew that there are a lot of Egyptians, they are swimming around there, and fortunately, king, actually, maybe, yeah, the daughter of Pharaoh, actually, the daughter of Pharaoh found Moses, and she actually adopted Moses as a son. So Moses was adopted son of Pharaoh's daughter. At the time, fortunately, the Pharaoh's daughter actually was swimming around there, and she heard the crying of baby, and as soon as she opened the basket, she found boy baby, and she fell in love with the baby and adopted Moses as a son. So that's why Moses was brought up into the royal court. Adopted as an adopted son. Actually, he also had learned all mysteries of Egyptian wisdom. So Moses was raised in the capital city, even actually Paris, as adopted prince of Egypt. So he become one of a talented person, intelligent guy, but almost at the age of maybe around 40, he knew that he is not the Egyptian. He is the son of or descendant of Israel people. He recognized that, and one day he saw that one Egyptian hitting the Israel people, and he got angry. He mad at Egyptian, and with a fist he murdered Egyptian. And after murdering of Egyptian, actually he ran away. He recognized even Moses was raised in Egyptian palace, and also as the son or adopted the son of King Pharaoh's daughter, but he recognized his identity. He knew that his nationality. I belong to Israel people. I'm not belong to Egyptian. So that's why. And after murdering one Egyptian, actually he fled to the country of the Midianite. Midianite, actually they are shepherds. So Moses was married one daughter of Midianite, and Moses become a shepherd. Look at the picture. He is Moses, okay? Almost at the age of 40, actually he becomes shepherd, and almost over 40 years, actually he become a shepherd, okay? He become a shepherd. He took care of the sheep, and he was with a sheep, and now he become almost 80 years old. Almost he become extremely old, and at the age of 80, suddenly one day he heard of the voice of God. Amazing thing happened to him. Unfortunately, he was with the sheep, and of over 40 years, maybe he can speak sheep's language. Meh, meh. He stay with the sheep more than people, so maybe he forget about his also original language. And now he was powerless, and extremely old man. He was weak person. But at that age, the age of 80, suddenly God appeared to Moses in the burning bushes, the year BC 1491. Because this is a historical fact. And Moses actually, he was surprised. The tree actually is on the fire, but when he approached to that tree, he recognized that the tree is not burning, but there was burning light in the bush, but it was not burned. So he was so surprised, and Moses asked a question to some unimaginable God. And he asked, "Who are you?" And finally God answered to Moses, "I am who I am." God introduced himself like that. I am who I am. Because God actually doesn't have an exact name. So that's why God introduced himself, I am who I am. And finally, Moses was called by God, and God chose Moses in order to exodus Israel people from Egypt. He chose Moses, and Moses finally go to the king of Egypt, Pharaoh, and he faced with him. King Pharaoh, actually, he is has a superpower and extremely high position, but at the time, Moses, he was only shepherd, not just wearing normal clothing with a staff. He was extremely old, and it looks like almost impossible to win over Pharaoh. But Moses was actually, he was Levi tribe. Previously, I'm talking about Jacob has 12 sons, and each sons become one ancestor of each tribe. Actually, Israel people was divided by 12 tribes, and Moses belonged to Levi. And Moses was the leader of Israelite, both in the Exodus and in the wandering in the wilderness. Maybe next class I'm gonna talking about wandering in the wilderness, and through actually try to read the book of Exodus. And Exodus was mighty act of God, and Moses warned Pharaoh, if you let our people go, let Israel people go, get out of Egypt, allow it. And Moses tried to persuade King Pharaoh, but he never listened. The King Pharaoh never listened to Moses. And finally, there was 10 plagues, that kind of some kind of natural disaster. And through that 10 actually plague show actually Yahweh, maybe another name of God. I am who I am. Yahweh's control over the force of nature finally convinced the power of the omnipotence of God. Actually, 10 flag is written in the Old Testament, especially the book of Exodus. Number one actually flag is the Nile River. Nile River actually turned to blood. So every fish died. There are a lot of smelling. So Egyptians were surprised because so suddenly Nile River turned to blood. There are a lot of smells. Most fish died. So fish rotten. A lot of smelling, bad smelling. And the second actually flag was flock. And flock is flag is everywhere. Even several hundred flags entered the house, even in the palace. So flock actually covered the whole Egypt. And later, some kinds of net, rice, it may be growing on your hair, okay? It is a small bug and sucking your blood in your body, maybe also with the mosquitoes. And also fishy, rotten, flaggy, died. There are a lot of bad smell, and finally flies. A lot of flies going around. And the fifth plague, actually disease on livestock. Suddenly cows, pigs, goats, they got disease, they die, and they are smelling. And the sixth actually plague was unhealable bulge. That means maybe there are so many mosquitoes and flies. They bite, they sucking the blood of a human being, and the humans, actually all Egyptians has a skin problem because of those buggers. And seventh was hail and thunderstorm from the heaven, and there are so many fires. And locust, finally, eighth was locust. They eating every corpse in the field. They locust eat all of the corn in the field, and there must be no food. And suddenly there was dark cloud, and maybe big sandstorm, and the whole Egypt actually become darkness, and it is impossible to see. Even daytime, it is impossible to see each other. Finally, the 10th plague was extremely chaotic. The first son of all people, including all animals, actually they died. So that's our firstborn. The Pharaoh, King Pharaoh, actually also lost his first son, and the King Pharaoh finally submitted, he surrendered. Okay, get out of here, Israel people, let go, live here. Finally, King Pharaoh actually allowed Israel people get out of the Egypt. And the last one is actually called last thing. Through the 10th plague, actually there was a Passover. So it is also written in the Exodus chapter 12. Before actually killing the firstborn son in each family, actually God ordered to kill the ram and put the blood of lamb on your door. And the angel came, and if the angel see the blood on the gate, he will pass. But if there is no blood, the angel go inside and killing the first son in that family. So that called Passover. So lamb's blood on the doorpost signify that's to pass over the house. That's why Passover. Still in modern day, the Israel people, wherever they live, they actually keep Passover. Even you look at the calendar, there is a Passover, okay, Passover. They getting together and study about this Exodus story. They believe this is the God's magnificent deed. God chose Israel people, and God actually let Israel people escape from the slave situation. So they celebrate even in modern day. And as soon as around 3 million people, maybe Jacob's family 400 years ago, I'm not sure how many people go into the Egypt, maybe around 200. But after 400 years later, actually they become almost 3 million people. Actually by the leader of Moses, actually 3 million people escaped from Egypt. So they crossed the Red Sea, And maybe you look at the map, and Ramses, maybe the one of the city, big city in Egypt. They escape from Ramses and go to, and finally you see the Suez Canal, and they must cross the river, or they must cross the ocean. So that area actually called Red Sea or Red Sea in modern day. But as you know, 3 million people getting together, and they try to face with the ocean. They stop there. Suddenly, King Pharaoh changed his mind and sent a big army in order to kill whole Israel people. And now Moses was in trouble. Before him, there was big ocean. Behind him, the Egyptian army followed in order to kill them. He was in trouble. But God actually ordered, stretch your arm and with your step, hit the ocean, and suddenly the ocean was open. So that was amazing actually miracle happened to Israel people. The opening of the Red Sea by a strong wind to let the Israel people cross. Finally, Israel people crossed the ocean. And as soon as they crossed that ocean, actually Egyptian army actually followed them. They also in the middle of the ocean. Suddenly, the ocean become the wave actually returned, and all of the Egyptian army died. So the destruction of the pursuing Egyptian by the returning water were evidence of God's hands in deliverance of Israel. So 3 million people saw the ocean is open, and as soon as they crossed that ocean, and it was closed and killed all of the Egyptian army. They saw the great miracle. Through their whole life, they never heard that ocean is open, but God did that miracle in order to make the history of Exodus. And Exodus actually become back to actually Israel. 400 years ago, Jacob left Israel, and finally 400 years later, Israel people, almost 3 million people back to Israel from Egypt. That's the story of the Exodus. So the nation of Israel, now 3 million people is enough to make one nation. God had delivered the Israelite from slavery in Egypt. They called Exodus and called them to be his special people. Still, Israel people believe that we are chosen people by God. So the Exodus, the going out from Egypt, was regarded by Israel as the beginning of their national history. So, little bit later, finally the nation of Israel was born. The Israel became a nation and entered the course of national development. This great event was commemorated each spring in Passover festival. That's why every year, actually, the Israel people, actually, they remember and they celebrate this Passover or Exodus story. So the number of 600,000 men means one man actually has a wife and 2 or 3 children. That's why 600,000 men means around 3 million people. Actually, we can estimate. And actually, that's the journey of Exodus. Look at the one picture. 3 million people, they migrate from Egypt back to Israel, Canaan. Their actually original land. Abraham lived there, Isaac lived there, actually Jacob lived that area, that Canaan. They back to their one original place. 3 million people actually moved. And the map, it actually showed the journey from the Exodus from Egypt, the journey, okay? See the map, Ramses and Pithom, as I said, the 2 big city was built by Israel people, and the Israel people, they crossed the Red Sea and go to several area, and finally back to Jericho. Jericho, and in that area you may see the Canaan, that area. Finally they back to their original place. Maybe through the next class I'm going to explain about that. Your homework is during this week is watch the movie. You may choose Ten Commandments in 1956. It was a great movie. I strongly recommend you to watch this movie. And second great movie called Prince of Egypt. This is a cartoon, another excellent movie. If you really want to understand the whole history of Exodus, I strongly recommend watch one of these movies and doing your homework. Thank you. See you next week.